After the Alliance fleet limped the last of their ships back to their respective territories, their leaders began to discuss the next move against humanity. The more aggressive species were adamant that they need to focus all of their resources into shipbuilding, weapon production, and so on. Anyone talking about basic necessities being focused on instead of the war were simply shouted down by the more aggressive species. The debates back and forth became demands of other species to sacrifice even more in the fight of this war in the service of those more noble authority. Finally, one species shouted, having enough of all this BS. This was a species the humans affectionately called a kitsune. They stood up and screamed, "You are all insane! Our fleets are in tatters, our populations are starving, and our production facilities are disappearing by the hour. At this point, if we wish to live within the next cycle, we need to look at alternatives." The furries, which were the main voice in the conflict, "We still have our home fleets. Our home sectors have much better defenses than some space stations and colonies. We can still fight back. We can destroy them as we have done with the last species to try anything." Ah, arrogance and stupidity in one complete package. Very efficient that you use the same arguments as the humans past. "You know nothing. They are just like the others." The humans are nothing like the Kakashani. The human history is packed with battles in which hubris, the humans also call pride, has caused their downfall. They capitalize on the smallest mistakes we make and destroy entire cultures in their past when they made big mistakes like this. And attacking Earth was one very large mistake. We will not fall due to this mistake. "You would make peace with those vile creatures? Those disrespectful hairless freaks? Even if you try it, it will destroy your entire economy. The only way out of this is to enslave your entire species to their yoke. Are you willing to watch your children be dragged off in chains?" You know nothing. For over a century now, humanity has banned the practice that you claim. After their third, not quite worldwide conflict, those even attempting such practices are met with fierce punishment. Punishment that has extended to the perpetrator's entire family. The humans are willing to delete entire bloodlines to end that practice. It is doubtful they will break their continued view now. "Enslavement can be conducted financially as well, you know this. Never, ever forget that." He grinned more, remembering the kitsune are currently in a substantial debt. The kitsune fluffed her tail as an act of defiance. "If it comes to a trial for such things, we will just hire human lawyers." She let that sink in and paused for a moment. "From this moment on, we are done with this war." She then walks out with another 5 species, leaving only the most brazen species in the council. The kitsune are the first ones to contact the humans with a request of cessation of hostilities in order to collect all the slaves taken and return them to their respective species. In response to this, it's immediate. The attacks in kitsune territory immediately cease. A response message was also received. Attached is a star map of the humanitarian corridors you may use to return those you have taken. Be aware that all movements will be monitored. Any aggressive movements will be addressed instantly and without mercy. You have 200 standard hours to return the first group. Other species followed suit, and soon the former enemies got a very good look at what's been killing them. As they jumped into one of the sectors to return a group of slaves, dozens of sleek, functional vessels floated in the void around them. The lack of aesthetics definitely gave away that these are very human ships. Each one had their turrets that seemed to be locked in their forward positions, but ready to turn and strike at a moment like a snake getting ready to strike its prey. The friendly forces would always send vessels up to retrieve their lost kin, as they did not want any enemy forces anywhere near their territory in the first place, let alone on their planets. Stands to reason they don't trust them anyway. The Kitsune leader became the main speaker for those that wanted to end the conflict. She met with the human fleet admiral and his staff aboard the battleship Kilimanjaro. When she walked in her ceremonial robes, all eyes seemed to widen looking at her. This would be the first time that any humans had saw one of her species in person. As she got to the center of the room, she knelt down in front of them, allowing the front of her robe to open, revealing her to all of humanity with her body. This was a sign of submission in her culture. This allowed everybody to see that, one, she was unarmed, and two, she had some very nice curves. After introducing herself, believing she would be given orders to serve as their mascot, her understanding of the humans was suddenly confirmed. The admiral, without even standing up, said, "Get off your knees. I'm not the Pope. Also, could you do me a favor and close your robe? I would like to be able to hold this conversation while looking in your eyes." As this meeting took place, the Alliance members reminded humanity that certain species will do anything to appear dominant to others. In one sector, a pair of ships taking former slaves back home came out of FTL to transfer the captured ones to friendly ships. As they're in the middle of a transfer, Alliance destroyers and one cruiser came out of FTL. After a single moment, human ships turned their turrets immediately towards the potential onslaught of the enemy. The Alliance ships began to transmit, "Those who are prisoners of war," and things like, "Spoils of war belong to the victor." There was a whole bunch of words that just didn't seem to make sense to human ears. There were all sorts of platitudes that did not translate well at all. Though once the cargo ships reported that they were actually being targeted, the game was immediately on. The Alliance ships turned and fired at the transport in order to kill the slaves and those returning said slaves. Human ships fired every interceptor device they had while moving their ships between the Alliance ships and these cargo vessels. The cargo vessels couldn't move as they're currently umbilical to each other, and disconnecting those without proper sealing would be a very, very bad idea. They stopped all but a single mass driver. The human ships came up broadside and seemed to form a shield, not allowing any direct line of sight to the cargo ships. The trade of ordnance then began, and the Alliance sent another volley of mass drivers, expecting the humans to turn and save themselves, but the humans didn't move. Alliance driver rounds flange on impact, limiting their penetrability. However, this also allows for maximum damage on the target they strike. This kept the civilians safe, but cost the human ships dearly as they all shuddered from the impact, all their thrusters turning on, trying to stay in position, trying to maintain the shield. The Alliance was forced to retreat after a quick back and forth as the human gunners decided, "Oh, we're done with this shit." And they fired absolutely perfect shots into the Alliance forces. The Alliance did retreat, with a single damaged cruiser jumping to FTL. The destroyers, by the time they turned to try and jump to FTL, were turned into nothing more than rogue pieces of metal floating in the void. Seeing this, though humanity and everyone else wanted to wait longer before everything kicked off, They didn't have a choice. The time is now. 16 human hours after the report came in that civilians were saved, while much of their fleets were still trying to save resources from the human hit and run attacks, the homeworlds of all the Alliance species still in the fight were being hit. All of them, with a single exception, found themselves facing a mixed fleet arriving in their sector, followed by even more ships that were trickling in as they just couldn't catch up in time. Without hesitation, these heavy-hitting ships began to lay all sorts of waste to the home fleets, driving in at point-blank range so that everything from the mass drivers all the way to the point defense cannons were giving all sorts of hell. Many of them simply opened up the sides, and the drones themselves could fire their short-range missiles without even leaving the ship. Then they could simply close the cargo bay doors after this massive swarm of missiles that looked like somebody had just kicked over 1,000 beehives and really pissed them off, was starting to tear into anything they could lock into. Human battleships are so covered in weapons that this was difficult to see the ship beneath. They fired multiple mass drivers in sequence, 4, 5, 6, right in a row, like somebody was firing a revolver, but they would reload just as fast, meaning there was absolutely no lag in fire. The las turrets danced across the skies, cutting all machines in range apart. Tertiary weapons are firing in grid patterns to assure that there will always be a strike somewhere, no matter the distance it is. The point defense systems added to the missile swarm as they started to take down every small piece that was there, and then coupled with the large ships that they could simply fire directly into. They were targeting so many things that the point defense systems would just swivel around right, left, up, down, backward, forward. It was though a conductor who was pissed off at the entire orchestra just trying to hurt them. And it just tore into anything they found. It didn't matter if it was ballistic or energy weapons. They were going to tear everyone a new one. Cruisers, destroyers, frigates, corvettes, gunships swarmed from every direction. The crews on board salivating at the chance to get really close and personal with the enemy, because now it sure seemed personal. As the enemy fleet fell, the shooting didn't stop. Even the las cannons are fairly useless in orbital bombardment due to the atmosphere and the magnetic fields and everything else messing up all sorts of energy weapons going through. The torpedoes, mass drivers, and of course nukes did the job just fine. It wouldn't take long for anyone to notice that the human fleet seems to focus on a certain quarter of the planet itself, seeming hell-bent to turn that entire quarter of the planet into nothing but an irradiated pile of rock. The only exception to this battle plan was the furry homeworld. The home fleet of the furries was destroyed by the mixed fleet of not only human, but all their allies and friends coming in, weapons blazing, most of them simply adding on to the firepower of human ships as they were the target to be taken out, which gave the rest of the ships free rein to fire into the enemy without any worries of return fire. Pretty soon, debris was sent to crash down to the planet, as many of the ships simply had their weapons and engines damaged to the point where they could not fight, but they also couldn't stay in orbit, and the gravity field would pull them down. Only certain areas would feel the pain of the mass drivers, though. Humans seemed to be waiting. They were waiting for just long enough that everyone started to wonder what the humans were doing. Then the human carriers arrive, all 4 of them. The drop began exactly like you would think. Mass drivers trying to shoot down whatever type of weapons they have that can take down the pods or frigates. Decoys, firebombs, EMPs, all ahead of the pods, along with anything else they could. Smoke, CS, it didn't matter. The first wave of heavy troopers was 8 full divisions. That was 8 divisions of heavy armor-wearing nightmare fuel coming in with enough firepower to take down a 20th century army by themselves. Right behind them in the second wave was 10 divisions of lighter armor infantry coming down. These were going to be much more maneuverable, but just as angry. Right behind them was the gunships and frigates sent down to support, bringing all sorts of vehicles as soon as they would land. The frigates released their fighters on the way down just to make sure there was enough air cover. Then they would head to the surface to be mobile bases as they normally would do. Just as the frigates touched down, spraying their point defense systems everywhere, trying to make sure that no one could sneak up on them, the order was given to release the beast. This was not just the armor that they had of tanks, artillery, and God knows what else. They also had exosuit-covered dragons with Garfields and halflings on their backs. The smaller riders meant less weight, which allowed for more guns. This was to support the dragons as they came down and quite literally breathed fire on the enemy. The chitters, hounds, land their own forces, as they don't really care for pods, and everything turns into a straight-up melee as the furries seem to charge in, trying to tear apart the humans with their own claws. The shooting kept going, rifles, shotguns, rotary weapons, any type of automatics they had, with claws and fangs ripping into each other as everybody started to tear about anything they didn't believe was friendly. Then the furries realized that not only the dragons, but the humans just absolutely love chucking plasma. They seem to throw these small devices that seem to burst into flame and cook through any vehicle, even the street, sometimes being dropped on buildings and going all the way into the basement, setting everything on fire. But if you got close to one and they were out of fire, well, there was always dragon's breath to help them out. There was also smoke being sprayed everywhere. It seems as though those suits had some sort of device to see through it that the furries just weren't wearing. They were always confused at what was going on and eventually realized that they could just charge through the smoke and then find themselves face to face with the enemy, which is exactly what they wanted. Then they would find out that that white smoke wasn't smoke. That was CS gas. And as they started choking, they would give away their position and either find themselves perforated full of holes, cooked into a crispy little critter, or a human would come up and drive a metal stake clean through their chest. Artillery fired over top of the humans and their allies, pushing the furries back even further and thinning their lines. Vehicles of all sizes and shapes began to make their way through. The Garfield tank is actually not much bigger than the human smart car, and it was strange to see them fighting side by side with human tanks. Even though, given its small size and smaller gun, it seems as though the Garfields had been taking the lessons the humans had given them for ground combat very seriously, and they were extremely efficient, as though they were Hellcats themselves. Though no one expected a battle on the home planet, the furry defenses were robust nonetheless, and they needed something big to break it. It seemed as though the furries were able to reinforce their lines a whole lot faster than anybody had anticipated, but the humans had brought something big just in case. The order was given. No guts, no galaxy, and something big began to stand up out of the frigates. This newly arrived frigates had brought down human-shaped and bird-shaped massive robots that began to stride across the battlefield. These engines of destruction would break the lines and allowing for the advance. They would move to one sector, using their armor to shake off any type of fire that was coming in, and then use their massive weapons to break the lines, allowing everyone to push through. In space, the fleets were dealing with even more enemy forces that arrived, usually in small groups. This was more of annoyance than anything else, as it was not enough to stop the invasion. Even though they did lose one or two ships, the furries were not going to be able to punch through, no matter how much anger they had. On the ground, it is seen that a female furry is whipping their slaves forward, and their young furries as well, forcing them to fight. As the female hound that she was whipping fell due to simply being knocked over, and was unable to stand due to the whip cracking on her leg, this 8'5" female furry raised its huge paw, getting ready to strike the girl down. At that moment, a heavy human exosuit crashed through the wall next to him like the Kool-Aid Man and said, "Get away from her, you bitch!" And then the furry charged at the suit and finds out you don't bring claws to a battle armor fight. After turning the furry into dog food, the female hound just watched as this giant hunk of metal that had just taken down its captor continued to kill and kill and kill, all the time wondering if this was some sort of angel to come and save her, or was this a demon come to kill everyone? The fight to the main stronghold left the streets covered in blood, quite literally. So much so that streams nearby had turned red and were now bleeding into the oceans. Heavy armor secured the perimeter, and it's time for the lighter infantry to do what they do best, but this time indoors. As they entered, they could see the corridors were wide to facilitate the furry biology. This allowed other species much, much more movement. In particular, toads using their insane ability to jump, and they could bounce off the walls so fast that the furries could only score a kill by a straight up lucky shot. This allowed the toads to get close, their weapons not able to punch through the hides of the furry unless they were dang near on top of them. The chitters and other insectoids could simply climb on the walls or on the ceilings, allow them to charge in mass, which to humans was enough to make them all just go, "Oh, that's gross." The hounds would charge down the hall, growling and snarling until they got right on their furry target. Once they did, they grabbed a hold and began thrashing violently with their humanoid bodies, allowing them to get even more torque on their bite, giving them the ability to rip large chunks of flesh out of their targets, aiming primarily to the neck, but they especially like to get a bite of the tender parts. The Garfields stayed very close to the humans, as their size makes them not seem like a threat. That is, until the 5.56mm starts perforating the target. Through all this, humans led the way down every single hall, utilizing a type of explosive death orb that everyone called it, along with plasma projectors, and whenever they got stopped by some sort of doorway, the humans would say, "Knock, knock," and then put something very special on it. They called it a breaching charge, which nobody wanted to be on the other side of. When the humans got close to their target, they always seemed to fall back on sharpened metal and bare hands. Everyone was amazed to see a human get right up close, jump up using their battle armor, and punch a furry so hard that the jaw visibly broke, almost separating fully from the body. As the furry got up to fight, the human simply jumped on top of it and beat it until he was just pushing wet pieces of bone into the floor. The battle all came to a head as they breached the throne room. The chief of the furries was standing in front of his throne on top of a podium, with over a dozen slaves chained to his throne. Each of these slaves was young, not all female, and they all had the same look in their eye, the same look that someone had done something horrible to them, again and again and again. Even behind the mask, everyone in that room could feel the humans getting angrier along with everyone else. The chieftain yelled, "Congratulations with coming this far, but you will now face your doom." He then pressed the button, and walls, at least seemed like walls, were actually hidden doors, opened up on several different directions, and what seemed like over 100 bulky fur piles of muscle charged the group that was inside the room. The resulting melee was nothing but blood, bone, claws, fangs, bullets, blades, and blunt weapons. It was insane, reaching up, grabbing a hold of a furry and trying to crank its arm enough where it went over sideways, then have another one swing at you with some sort of blunt weapon, moving just enough so the blunt weapon came down on the furry brethren, then trying desperately to try and stab this one, trying to shoot one of them without hitting your own folks, as everybody was scattered all over the place. Chitters jumping up and using their multiple legs to tear into whatever they could get a hold of. Hounds grabbing a hold of arms, legs, necks, faces, and even, yes, their junk, and thrashed around, ripping it off, also using their claws to rip into whatever they could. Garfields, not able to shoot, jumped up and started thrashing at the faces so much that they would rip the eyeballs out. Unfortunately, this usually meant that the furry would reach up, grab the Garfield, and crush it in its hand. You didn't want to be caught by the massive paws of these things, as they were absolutely horrible. The melee still moved around as everyone kept fighting more and more and more. But the battle did come to an end, as many of the humans and friendlies were being held down in position. Seeing this, the chieftain jumped down and knocked over the last of the friendly forces before grabbing the human in charge of the assault group.
"Now that I have you, you will obey me. Contact your kin. Tell them to surrender, or I will destroy you and all the slaves. Do you understand?"
When he said this, he was holding onto the human and forced the human down to his knee so that the human's face was in perfect position to, shall we say, prove his submission. The human, still wearing his mask even though it was pretty well messed up, turned up a little bit before saying, "I've always wanted to say this.
"Get your damn hands off me, you damn dirty ape!"
At that moment, he reached into the holster attached to his leg and pulled out a customized Benelli semi-auto shotgun from its holster, and then shot the ape right in his calf, blowing it open. The first shot of the chieftain's leg forced him down to one knee. The second one clipped his shoulder. Then the shotgun clicked. Oh shit, out of ammo. The other furries held on to the friendlies they captured as they watched the fight. This was something in the furry culture, that once you face the chieftain, if it's one-on-one, it remains that way. The human looks around and reached for another weapon, but he couldn't get it. The chieftain charged in a rage. The human ducks and performs a hip toss of the chieftain, tossing him straight towards the door. The chieftain stood up, seemingly grinning as he showed his teeth.
"Nice trick, human. I believe I will enjoy breaking your mind and spirit, turning you into a soulless automaton for my own disposal and pleasure."
The human simply looks and says, "No thanks, I've already had a wife." The chieftain steps forward, believing that he can take on the human no problem. As he steps forwards, the dragon's head that he didn't see reaching through the doorway was right behind him. It reached through, grabbed the chieftain, and dragged him screaming through the door. As he did, another dragon reached in and began to pull on the chieftain's leg. Then another, as they pulled him right into the hallway. As the three dragons seemed to disappear from sight, everyone just looked at the doorway. From the inside of the throne room, all anyone saw was the chieftain dragged out screaming. Then the tearing of flesh. They saw the spray of blood go against the walls and the floor, the screams of fear and pain, the crunching of bones, and then silence. A few moments later, the dragons came back and squeezed their way into the throne room. The human that had fought the chieftain turned to the others and said, "So, how do the rest of you want to play this?" The rest of the furries in the room looked at each other, lowered their heads, released their grips, and dropped to their knees. The human said, "Good answer. Good answer." With the fall of the furries and the destruction of a quarter of their own homeworlds, the other species surrendered. Though the humans will aid everybody in rebuilding, their kindness has absolute limits. Once they made sure that a species would not actually go extinct and they could survive and possibly thrive in a generation or two, they simply returned back to human territory. Humanity went back to working through commerce and diplomacy by building a station just inside its own borders so that each species can be heard without one species holding it over the rest. The humans at this point would be administrators, and that's all. They wouldn't ever bring out their military unless they absolutely had to. This was made clear as they said that unless you're invited, stay the hell out of our territory. Everybody agreed, of course. As commerce with the humans and everyone else commenced back to where it was, well, as close as it can be before this all started, and even though relationship formed, all the species seemed to know something. It was always whispered out there. All the species made sure to remember that humans may not be monsters themselves, as they're usually very nice. No, humans hold back the demons, the monsters. They keep them inside. And for the rest of eternity, they need to make sure that they never give the humans a reason to let it out. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me today on the final chapter of this story. Before I go, I need to send out a quick thank you to one of my supporters, and that is the Guardian Sage. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Everyone else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.